Hello everybody, welcome to this episode on statistics. In this video, we will be talking about the basics of t-distribution and t-tables. Before continuing with this video, I put 3 videos into the description. Please watch these 3 videos in order for you to understand this video. If you do not, you would not understand what I'm saying. These 3 videos are about normal distribution, standard deviation, and basic word definitions. Let's move on. Let's do a quick recap on normal distribution. This is a normal distribution. And let's say I collected data of student marks. Student marks is very popular and it's known for always resulting in a normal distribution because some students get very low marks, some students get very high marks, but most of them cluster around the mean. Most of the students get around the average marks. So let's say that this is the graph of student marks in a class from a class. So what did I do to get this data? There are 30 students in a class, for let's say, and I asked each of them what their results were. I calculated the mean and standard deviation, and I plotted the graph. So in this situation, the population is this whole class. It's not a sample. This whole class is the population, and I have the whole population here. Another thing you probably realize is that although there are 30 students, there is only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 points. You do not need 30 points. You only need the one that make a difference. So you do not need 14 and 14.2. That's not necessary. 14 and 16 is okay. It doesn't have to be so specific. So now let's say that you're collecting student marks from a whole school. Are you going to be asking every single student what their results are? Because that will take way too long. Instead of that, let's say that this is the people in the whole school. Take a sample of, let's say, 40 people and ask them. Ask them what their results were and plot the graph based on their data. But one thing you must realize is that the smaller the sample size, the less accurate the data will be. So it's good to have a bigger sample, but of course it also depends on how much time you have. Now let's get to t-distribution. But before you understand t-distribution, we have to recap on standard normal distribution because you need to get a good foundation of these topics before you can understand t-distribution. So let's say this is the normal distribution you have, and a standard normal distribution is basically just a normal distribution but with a mean of 0 and a standard deviation of 1. These are fixed. So standard normal distribution, also known as z-distribution, is a fixed normal distribution. So you usually take the values from your normal distribution and convert it into z values, which are basically the values in the z distribution. But one thing I didn't tell you about the z distribution is that in order to be using it, the sample must be bigger than 20 and the population standard deviation must be known. But another thing is that this is not a strict rule. Even if the sample is smaller than 20, you can technically use the standard normal distribution, but the thing is it would not be as accurate, and if it's not very accurate, then what's the point of doing it? And t-distribution is actually related to the standard normal distribution, and in order for you to use the t-distribution, the sample must be smaller than 20 and the population standard deviation is unknown. So if you do not have any time and you do not have much time and your sample is very small, the t-distribution will help you a lot. And if the population standard deviation is unknown too, what you have to understand is that this will most likely be the case. So you will probably be using a t-distribution a lot more than you think. So what is the t-distribution? The t-distribution is not like the z-distribution. It is in a fixed graph. The different types of t-distribution, and that depends on the degrees of freedom. What is the degrees of freedom? Degrees of freedom is basically just a sample size minus 1. So let's take a look at this t-distribution right here. This t-distribution has a degrees of freedom of 19. That means that the sample size is 20. And this degrees of freedom this t-distribution has a degrees of freedom of 8. So that means the sample was 9 people. So what we realize is that the smaller the sample size, the higher the variability in the t-distribution. Because if your sample size is 8, there's a much higher chance that you missed some important data. That's why it's more spread, it's more higher up. But if you sample size 20, it won't be as higher up. It'll still be high up, but it won't be as high up because you probably got most of the information, but you probably still missed some. So the bigger the sample size, the more accurate the data will be, and the lesser the variability of the t-distribution will be. And the larger the degrees of freedom, the more the t-distribution looks like a z-distribution. The z-distribution has degrees of freedom around 30, but it doesn't matter because technically the t-distribution only goes up until 19, because in order to be using a t-distribution, you need a sample of below 20 or 20. Now let's get into the t-table. I will not be going completely in depth of the t-table because there's a lot more to it, but I'll just go through the basics. Let's say that this is the t-distribution that you have, and you want to find the area of this green part here, or the percentage or whatever. The percentage of this is 25%, and you have to find 25, which is also known as 0.25, and this top row right here. And this right here, df, which is also known as degrees of freedom, the degrees of freedom of this is 8. So look for 8 here. So this is 8. And if you intersect both of them, you get this 0.706387. And it's alright if you do not understand. I'm not going too much in depth in this. I'm just telling you the basics of how to use this. And this number right here, what can you actually do with this number? This number is called the t critical value, and it can help us with confidence intervals and hypothesis testing. And that right there is beyond the scope of this video. I hope you all have learned something about the t-distribution, and I hope you've learned anything at all. If you have any questions, please put it down in the comments below. Don't worry, I'll be talking about confidence intervals and hypothesis testing and more about the t-table later on in another video. But this is just the basics you need to know about the t-distribution. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, please consider putting a like. If you want to see more statistic videos like this, check out my playlist. I will be uploading every week. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.